The emergency sirens wailed through the crisp autumn air as the mountain shadows stretched long across the craggy terrain. Bruce, a once proud German shepherd, stood motionless at the entrance of the collapsed Silver Creek mine. His muzzle, now speckled with gray, twitched as his nose sniffed the air, a trained sense of smell that had once guided him through countless rescue missions. Beneath the rubble, 7 miners were trapped, and every second counted. "Find them, Bruce," his handler, James Mitchell, whispered, his voice thick with urgency. The dog's ears pricked forward, and without a second's hesitation, he bolted into the narrow tunnel. Bruce's powerful frame moved like a shadow, navigating the maze of twisted beams and scattered debris. The air was thick with dust, but Bruce pressed on, determined, as always, to save lives. After what seemed like an eternity, Bruce's nose led him to a patch of the rubble where the scent of human life lingered, faint but unmistakable. With a sharp bark, he alerted the rescue team, tail wagging in anticipation. They quickly followed his lead, digging into the debris. Minutes later, they freed the miners, and as they were pulled from the wreckage, cheers erupted from the crowd. Bruce stood tall, covered in dust, but filled with pride. It was his 43rd successful rescue, a record that had made him a legend. But fate, as always, is cruel to heroes. 3 days later, during a routine training exercise, disaster struck. A nervous trainee mishandled Bruce during a high-stress simulation. Startled, the dog growled a warning, something instinctual. But the trainee, panicking, screamed that Bruce had attacked. The media descended with ruthless ferocity, their headlines screaming, "Hero dog turns violent." The damage was immediate. Despite James's impassioned defense of his loyal partner, the public outcry was deafening. The decision was made swiftly. Bruce was retired, his service collar was removed, and his life as a rescue dog was over. "I'm sorry, boy," James whispered through tears, his voice breaking as he removed the collar for the last time. The dog, confused and heartbroken, watched as the man he trusted more than anything in the world walked away. Within a week, Bruce was sold off to a breeding facility, his years of heroism forgotten, packed away in a dusty file cabinet. James never saw him again. Bruce's story, however, was far from over. Welcome to HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The breeding facility, tucked away in a remote part of the countryside, was a far cry from the mountain rescue teams that had once relied on Bruce's incredible abilities. The facility was cold, mechanical, its halls filled with the sound of barking dogs whose futures seemed as bleak as his own. Once a beacon of hope, Bruce now found himself a shell of the dog he had once been. His coat, once gleaming, was now matted and dull. His muscles, honed from years of rescue work, atrophied from confinement. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, now held a vacant, haunted look. But Bruce wasn't alone in his suffering. There were many others at the facility, all of them discarded for various reasons, some too old, others too injured, and some like Bruce, who had once been heroes only to be thrown away when they were no longer deemed useful. The facility, underfunded and overcrowded, had no room for the emotional needs of these dogs. The staff, overwhelmed by the sheer number of animals, could do little more than feed and clean. There was no love, no connection, just survival. Bruce, however, wasn't a dog who gave up easily. Bruce's days in the breeding facility blended into one another. His life, once filled with purpose, had become a monotonous cycle of confinement. Each day, he would pace the cold concrete floors of his small kennel, his body language heavy with despair. He no longer barked with joy at the sight of his handlers. He merely watched. A ghost of the dog he once was. The scars from his past were visible in every inch of his being. Physical scars, yes, faded but still there. Reminders of the years spent navigating the treacherous mountains, the training exercises, and the harrowing rescues. But the emotional scars were deeper. Bruce had been a hero. He had saved lives. He had been loved. Now all of that seemed so far away, a distant memory buried under layers of trauma. But as time wore on, something inside him began to stir. A flicker of the dog he used to be. A small act of kindness here and there, a gentle touch from a volunteer, a soft voice calling his name. He began to respond, ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was something. One volunteer, a young woman named Lisa, noticed Bruce. She could see beyond the emptiness in his eyes. She saw the dog that had once been a partner to a rescue handler. A dog that had known the joy of finding the lost and saving lives. So, she took it upon herself to sit outside his kennel during her breaks, reading aloud in a soft voice. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Bruce to begin slowly inching toward the front of the kennel when Lisa arrived. He didn't make contact, but he no longer turned away. Still, the shelter staff had almost given up on finding a home for Bruce. Despite his remarkable past, his trauma and emotional withdrawal made him less than desirable to potential adopters. His profile was met with hesitation. Families wanted puppies, not old, broken dogs with baggage. And yet every time Lisa saw him, every time she watched him stand quietly by the gate of his kennel, she couldn't help but feel that Bruce deserved more than this. He deserved a second chance. Aubrey and Cory had been searching for months. After the loss of their beloved dog, Charlie, a golden retriever who had been their constant companion through the trials and joys of life, they were broken. The silence that had fallen over their home was unbearable. They had tried to move on, but nothing filled the hole Charlie left behind. They considered adopting a puppy, but after much thought, they decided they wanted to give a senior dog a chance, one that might otherwise never have a second chance at a life filled with love. They researched local shelters and read heart-wrenching stories about the high euthanasia rate for senior dogs, particularly those with medical issues or behavioral challenges. It was then that they stumbled upon the Riverside Animal Shelter's website and saw Bruce's profile. They knew he was the one. The first time they saw him, Bruce didn't approach them, just as Lisa had warned. He remained in the back of his kennel, watching them with the same empty eyes that had greeted every visitor. But Aubrey and Cory didn't shy away. They simply sat down quietly in front of his cage, their presence calm and non-threatening. They spoke in soft tones, not rushing to make a connection, but allowing it to happen naturally. Minutes ticked by before something remarkable happened. Bruce took a step, then another. The movement was small, subtle, but it was there. Aubrey noticed it, but she didn't react. She continued talking to Cory, letting Bruce take the lead. Slowly, Bruce closed the distance between them. His nose twitched, and his ears flickered forward as if recognizing something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to move Aubrey to tears. She had seen that look before, the cautious curiosity that marked the beginning of trust. "He's choosing us," Aubrey whispered to Cory, her voice trembling. Cory, usually the more reserved of the two, nodded, his expression unreadable. "We can't let him down." The adoption process wasn't easy. Bruce's medical history was complicated. He had dental issues, arthritis, and signs of emotional trauma that required extensive care. The shelter staff had been transparent about his challenges. They warned Aubrey and Cory that adopting Bruce would take time and patience. But Aubrey and Cory were determined. They weren't just adopting a dog. They were committing to helping him heal. Every obstacle they encountered, home visits, health evaluations, financial constraints, only strengthened their resolve. "Let's do this," Cory said one evening, his voice firm. "We'll give him the chance he deserves." And so, they began the process of bringing Bruce into their home. They knew it wouldn't be easy. Bruce had suffered too much, and healing would take time. But they were ready. For the first time in a long while, they felt hope. Hope that they could heal together with Bruce. Bruce's first few days in his new home were full of uncertainty. Aubrey and Cory had meticulously prepared, following every piece of advice from the shelter staff and Dr. Thompson, the behaviorist who had worked with Bruce during his adjustment. His designated safe space in the living room was set up a cozy corner with soft bedding and low lighting, and they made sure the house was quiet and calm when Bruce arrived. But despite all their preparations, Bruce remained distant. He had come from a place of abandonment, of abuse, and the fear and distrust were still fresh. The once proud rescue dog, who had helped save lives, now cowered in a corner, his eyes wary and his body tense. For days, Bruce wouldn't interact. He wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't come for food unless left alone, and avoided any form of affection. It was heartbreaking to watch. The dog that had once been so full of life and purpose, now broken, unable to trust. Aubrey and Cory didn't push him. They understood that trust had to be earned, and healing didn't happen overnight. They let him set the pace, letting him explore the house at his own speed, never forcing him to come out of his shell. But there was a small victory when Bruce began to follow them with his eyes. At first, it was only brief moments, but it was enough to give them hope. Slowly, very slowly, Bruce began to relax his body. He would come out of his corner during meals, cautiously sniffing around, and sometimes, just sometimes, he would sit quietly near Aubrey or Cory. It was in the quiet moments, those small, tender moments, that Bruce began to show signs of progress. One afternoon, Aubrey decided to take a walk with Bruce in the backyard, just to let him stretch his legs and enjoy the sunshine. Bruce, though still tentative, followed her to the door. His tail remained tucked, and his body stiff, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the fresh air and taking in the new smells. It was a victory, however small, that he was willing to explore the outside world again. They spent the next few weeks this way, slow and steady. Aubrey and Cory established routines that brought comfort to Bruce. He ate on a set schedule, went for walks at the same time each day, and had moments where he could simply be in the same room with them without fear. But Bruce's anxieties weren't easy to overcome. The smallest sounds could send him into a panic. A car backfiring would send him scrambling for cover, his breathing erratic, his body trembling with fear. The simple act of a vacuum turning on would send him into a frenzy, and even the sudden shift of a shadow in the room could make him retreat. Aubrey and Cory took it all in stride, learning to adjust their lives around Bruce's needs. They would calmly reassure him during his anxious moments, not forcing him to interact, but allowing him to feel safe. One night, after a particularly rough day filled with anxiety attacks, Aubrey found herself sitting quietly in the living room, reading aloud, a practice she had picked up from the shelter staff. Bruce remained huddled in his corner, his eyes flicking between her and the door. But as she continued, something remarkable happened. Bruce stood up, his body language more relaxed, and he cautiously made his way over to her. He didn't touch her, but he lay down nearby, his ears flicking as if listening to her every word. Aubrey didn't move. She let him come to her. And for the first time since he arrived, Bruce stayed close without fear, his breathing steady. It was a moment of connection, one that felt like a small victory in the midst of a long, difficult journey. Bruce's trust grew, little by little. He began to come out of his shell, one small step at a time. Every night, Aubrey and Cory would sit with him, not pushing for interaction, but simply being there. They had learned that it wasn't about forcing Bruce to heal. It was about giving him the space he needed to heal on his own. And slowly, the dog they had adopted began to show signs of who he had once been, a courageous, loyal companion. His heart, though bruised, still had room for love. It was just going to take time. And time, it seemed, was exactly what Bruce needed. It had been weeks since Bruce had come to live with Aubrey and Cory. Every day was a mixture of small victories and setbacks. They had come to accept that progress with Bruce wouldn't be linear. There would be moments of joy followed by days of anxiety. But they had learned to stay patient, knowing that healing takes time, especially for a soul as broken as his. One day, while Aubrey was out running errands, she stopped at a small local pet store. The aisles were lined with colorful displays of dog toys, treats, and accessories, but nothing stood out. Bruce, after all, wasn't a dog who could be easily entertained with just anything. But something caught her eye at the back of the store. Hidden under piles of other, flashier toys, an old, soft lamb plush toy. It was small, with floppy ears and a gentle, innocent expression. The lamb wasn't particularly special, but there was something about it that resonated with Aubrey. It reminded her of Bruce. She bought on impulse, along with a bag of organic treats, hoping that this simple gesture would help bridge the gap between them. Maybe, just maybe, Bruce would accept this toy. It wasn't a squeaky ball or a rope toy. It was soft, comforting, and simple, like the trust she was trying to build with him. When she returned home, Bruce was curled up in his usual spot under the dining room table. He hadn't moved much that day, still avoiding too much interaction, too much attention. Aubrey sat down on the floor, not too close, but within his view, and carefully unwrapped the lamb toy. She made sure to be gentle, not wanting to startle him. "Look what I found today, Bruce," she said softly, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Just a little friend, if you're interested." She placed the lamb gently on the floor between them, just close enough for Bruce to notice, but far enough to give him the space he needed. Then, she turned her attention to her phone, pretending not to notice his every move. She wanted him to feel in control of the situation. For a long moment, nothing happened. Bruce didn't move. His eyes tracked the toy cautiously, but he remained where he was, his body tense with suspicion. Aubrey felt a familiar pang of disappointment. She had hoped this would be the breakthrough he needed, but instead, it felt like just another failed attempt. Then a twitch in his nose. Bruce shifted ever so slightly. His eyes flickered toward the lamb, then back to Aubrey. His ears twitched. His tail, which had been firmly tucked beneath him for weeks, seemed to relax just a little. Aubrey held her breath as Bruce slowly stood up. He took one tentative step forward, then another. His body was still stiff, but his movements were purposeful. Bruce sniffed the toy, his nose twitching as he examined it. Then, he touched it with his snout. Aubrey's heart skipped a beat. This was different. He didn't retreat. Instead, he nudged the lamb slightly, testing it, as if trying to understand it. The softness of the toy, the innocence in its design, Bruce seemed to recognize it. Bruce took another step forward, and then, in a moment that brought tears to Aubrey's eyes, he gently picked up the lamb in his mouth. His grip was soft, as though he understood that this small, plush object wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of trust, of healing. Bruce carried the lamb with him, moving to different spots in the room. He didn't chew on it, didn't tear it apart like most dogs would with a new toy. Instead, he treated it with care, nudging it gently and carrying it from one place to another, as if unsure whether to keep it or let it go. When Cory came home later that evening, he found Bruce curled up with the lamb between his paws, a picture of contentment. It was the first time he had seen Bruce so relaxed since he arrived. The tension in his body had melted away, replaced by a quiet peace. Aubrey smiled as she watched her husband crouch down to pet Bruce. The dog didn't pull away. Instead, he looked up at Cory with those soulful eyes, his tail giving the faintest wag. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Looks like we found something that works," Cory said softly, his voice full of awe. Who would have thought a little lamb would be the key? Aubrey wiped her tears away, not wanting to disturb the fragile moment of connection between them and their broken companion. It was a breakthrough, one they had been waiting for, a tiny step forward in a long and difficult journey. But they both knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Bruce had begun to trust them again. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to accept love in the form of a simple toy. It was a start, but it was enough. Bruce wasn't the same dog that had arrived in their home, broken and afraid. He was healing. Slowly but surely, piece by piece, he was finding his way back to who he had once been. And so were they. The toy, which they had named Lambie, became a part of Bruce's daily routine. He carried it with him wherever he went, holding it gently in his mouth, a constant companion in his new life. Aubrey and Cory watched with amazement as Bruce began to show more interest in the world around him. The toy had become a bridge between his past trauma and his present healing. Bruce wasn't just a dog who had been saved. He was a dog who had been reborn. The lamb had given him a symbol of trust, a small piece of normalcy in a life that had been turned upside down. It was a sign that Bruce was beginning to believe again, to hope again. And as each day passed, the healing continued. He was learning to love again, learning to trust. And for the first time in a long while, Aubrey and Cory felt like they weren't just giving Bruce a second chance. They were healing too. It had been 2 months since Bruce had come to live with Aubrey and Cory. His journey from a broken, traumatized dog to one who was beginning to trust again had been full of setbacks and small victories. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sunlight filtered softly through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. Aubrey and Cory were busy with their morning routines. Aubrey preparing breakfast, Cory working through some architectural plans. Bruce, as usual, was lying in his favorite spot by the sliding glass door, his prized lamb toy nestled securely between his paws. Then it happened. A young golden retriever puppy from the neighbor's house, all gangly legs and wagging tail, squeezed through a gap in the fence and bounded onto their patio. The puppy pressed his nose against the glass door, leaving excited smudge marks in his enthusiasm. Aubrey froze, watching in anticipation, wondering how Bruce would react. They had seen moments of progress with Bruce. He had started to interact more, to trust more, but this? A playful, energetic puppy? Bruce had always been cautious with new things, and the sight of a puppy bursting into their space might have triggered his anxiety. But something extraordinary happened instead. Bruce lifted his head, his ears perking up in interest. His usual posture, tense and defensive, softened. Instead of retreating to his safe space as he would have done just weeks ago, Bruce stood up. Slowly, cautiously, he walked toward the door, his tail just slightly raised. He was calm, observant, curious, even. Aubrey looked at Cory, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He's not afraid," she whispered. Bruce, without hesitation, took a step closer to the glass door, his gaze fixed on the playful puppy. The puppy, oblivious to the significance of the moment, continued pawing at the glass, trying to engage Bruce in play. Bruce, for the first time since his arrival, did something that shocked everyone. He placed his lamb toy gently on the floor, stepped back, and lowered his head. He was ready to interact, and what followed was nothing short of miraculous. Bruce walked carefully toward the puppy, his movements slow but deliberate. The puppy, sensing something special, stood still, waiting for Bruce to approach. As Bruce got closer, he lowered his head, sniffing the puppy carefully from nose to tail. The puppy didn't shy away, but stood there, as if recognizing Bruce as something more than just another dog. Then, in a gesture that seemed to shed years of trauma, Bruce raised his head and did something he hadn't done in what felt like forever. He wagged his tail. Not the hesitant, unsure wag that had appeared from time to time, but a full, genuine wag that spoke of trust and potential joy. Aubrey's heart soared. Cory couldn't hide the tears in his eyes. "Look at him," he whispered, watching Bruce interact with the puppy. The dog they had brought home, a dog who had once been so fearful, so broken, was finally embracing the chance to be himself again. The moment continued to unfold in slow motion as Bruce and the puppy played together. Bruce, though stiff at first, began to relax. His movements, once so guarded, became fluid, natural. They chased each other around the patio, Bruce always careful not to overtake the young pup, but instead playfully responding to its boundless energy. Aubrey and Cory watched in awe. They had never seen Bruce so carefree, so full of life. It was as though the puppy had awakened something deep within him, something that had been dormant for so long. As the minutes passed, the puppy's playful bark echoed through the yard, and Bruce responded with a bark of his own. They tumbled together, paws in the air, in a beautiful dance of new beginnings. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Bruce stopped, looking back at Aubrey and Cory. He placed his lamb toy on the ground between them, as though offering it as a gift, a sign that he was ready to share his world with them, not just in the quiet moments, but in the joy of play as well. "That's our Bruce," Cory said, his voice thick with emotion. Bruce, once a hero who had saved countless lives, was now showing that he still had the heart of a champion. The trauma had taken much from him, but it had not taken his spirit. With each passing day, he was learning to trust again, to play, to love. And as he looked at the couple who had given him a second chance, his eyes no longer held the haunted look of abandonment. They were bright with hope. That evening, as the sun set, Bruce lay between Aubrey and Cory on the living room floor, the lamb toy resting at his side. For the first time in a long time, he was content. His journey was far from over, but the healing that had begun was undeniable. The pain of his past was still there, but now it was tempered by the love and trust he had found with his new family. In that quiet moment, they all understood something profound, that sometimes the most broken hearts could heal the most. That love and patience could transform even the most shattered of souls. Bruce's journey, though long and difficult, had come full circle. He had gone from a hero to a broken dog, and finally, to a healed and beloved companion. The dog who had saved lives had now found his own salvation, not through rescues or missions, but through love, patience, and a new beginning. Bruce's story is a testament to the power of second chances and the resilience of the heart. It reminds us that healing isn't a straight line. It's full of setbacks and breakthroughs. But with patience and love, even the most broken of souls can find peace and joy again. Bruce's journey, from a hero to a lost soul, and finally to a beloved companion, shows us that sometimes the most profound transformations come through the smallest acts of trust and kindness. What part of Bruce's story touched you the most? Please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this journey with Bruce, consider subscribing to the HeartForce channel for more inspiring stories about dogs and their incredible ability to heal hearts.